Get that rusty piece of junk off my street, you hillbilly. The words sliced through the calm morning air like a whip crack, jolting me from my work under the hood of my old pickup truck. I straightened up, wiping grease from my hands, and there she was, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the Sunny Hills HOA, marching across my ranch like she owned it. Her face was beet red, her perfectly manicured nails jabbing the air like tiny daggers. I'm Tom, a 55-year-old rancher who's called this 20-acre slice of Texas heaven home for decades. My family's worked this land for 3 generations, long before Karen's gated community of cookie-cutter mansions sprouted up like weeds on the edge of my property. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind where the sun's just warm enough to make you forget the world's troubles. I was tinkering with my 1987 Ford F-150, a beat-up beauty I've been restoring bit by bit for the sheer joy of it. The truck was parked near the edge of my property, close to the dirt road that separates my ranch from Sunny Hills. It's not much to look at yet, faded paint, a few dents. But to me, it's a project, a piece of history. To Karen, apparently, it was a crime scene. She stormed closer, her designer sneakers kicking up dust, her voice hitting octaves that could spook my horses. "This eyesore violates HOA regulations," she shrieked, waving a clipboard like it was a court order. I squinted at her, half amused, half baffled. My ranch isn't part of her precious HOA, never has been, never will be. The property line's clear as day, marked by a low stone fence my granddad built in the 60s. I could have told her that, but the way she was carrying on, I figured she wasn't in a listening mood. "Ma'am," I said, leaning against the truck, "this is my land. Been mine longer than you've been driving that fancy golf cart." Her eyes narrowed to slits, and she clutched her phone like a weapon. "We'll see about that," she hissed, punching in 911 with the urgency of someone reporting a hostage crisis. I crossed my arms, watching her rant to the dispatcher about illegal parking and property devaluation. She threw in vagrant activity for good measure, casting a pointed glance at my work boots and flannel shirt. Vagrant? On my own ranch? I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Karen thought she was calling in the cavalry, but she had no idea who was about to roll up. My son, Jake, the county sheriff, was on duty that morning. And let's just say, Karen was about to learn a lesson she wouldn't forget. "You'll regret this, cowboy," she spat, hanging up with a triumphant smirk. I just tipped my hat and went back to my wrench, curious to see how this circus would play out. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the HOA president, a title she brandished like a scepter and enforced with the zeal of a medieval warlord. Sunny Hills, the gated community bordering my ranch, had materialized 5 years ago, a sprawl of oversized houses with pristine lawns and driveways full of gleaming SUVs. It was a stark contrast to my weathered fences and sprawling pastures, where my horses grazed and my barn stood proudly, painted a bold red that hadn't faded since my dad touched it up in the 80s. Most Sunny Hills folks were friendly enough, waving as they jogged by or stopping to admire my horses. But Karen? She was a one-woman crusade to civilize our corner of Texas, and she decided my ranch was her personal battleground. She'd moved in 2 years ago, a transplant from some city up north, armed with a rule book thicker than a phone book and an ego to match. From day one, she'd set her sights on me. It started with a letter, hand-delivered by her husband, a quiet guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, complaining that my barn's garish red paint clashed with Sunny Hills' neutral palette. I tossed it in a drawer, figuring it was a one-off. Then came more letters. My horses were too noisy at dawn. My fence was unsightly. My mailbox wasn't regulation height. Each one was signed with her looping signature and a passive-aggressive "for the betterment of our community." I ignored them all. My 20 acres, complete with a creek and a century-old oak, predate her HOA by generations. I've got the deeds, the surveys, and a lawyer on speed dial to prove it. Karen didn't care about facts. To her, my ranch was a blight. On her vision of suburban utopia, a stubborn relic that refused to bow to her authority. My truck, parked near the property line, was just the latest offense. She'd probably spotted it that morning while cruising in her golf cart, her daily ritual of patrolling sunny hills for violations. I'd seen her before, clipboard in hand, measuring neighbors' grass or tisk-tisking at unapproved flower beds. To her, my truck, a '87 Ford with character earned from years of hauling hay and dodging Texas storms, wasn't just a vehicle, it was a rebellion, a rusty middle finger to her manicured world. That morning, something in her snapped. Maybe it was the way the truck's chrome caught the sunlight, or maybe she'd had one too many espressos. Whatever it was, she'd decided to escalate from letters to law enforcement. As she stood there, yelling into her phone about illegal, parking, and property devaluation, I could have pulled out my property map and ended it right there. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that some folks need to trip over their own arrogance before they learn humility. Karen was practically sprinting toward that fall, and I wasn't about to stop her. She thought she was calling in the cavalry, but she didn't know the sheriff was my son, raised on this very land, driving that very truck when he was 16. Her smugness was almost comical, like a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. I sipped my coffee, leaned against the fence, and let her dig her own grave, knowing the showdown was about to get interesting. The hum of a sheriff's cruiser broke the morning's tension, its tires crunching gravel as it rolled down my dirt driveway about 15 minutes after Karen's 911 call. The vehicle's lights flashed lazily, no sirens, kicking up a faint cloud of dust that shimmered in the sunlight. Karen stood at the edge of my property, arms crossed, her clipboard tucked under one elbow like a badge of authority. Her smirk was wider than the Rio Grande, her eyes gleaming with the certainty of victory. She was sure the law was about to swoop in, tow my truck, and maybe even slap me with a fine for daring to defy her HOA empire. I leaned against my fence, sipping coffee from a chipped mug, and waved as the cruiser door swung open. Out stepped Jake, my son, all 6'2" of him, broad-shouldered and wearing the county sheriff's uniform, with the same quiet confidence I'd seen in him since he was a boy. At 32, Jake's a spitting image of me at that age. Same crooked grin, same steady gaze that says he's not easily rattled. He climbed the ranks to sheriff fast, earning respect for his fairness and deep roots in our community, where everyone knows everyone's business, and most folks know better than to stir up trouble. "Morning, Dad," he said, tipping his hat, his voice calm but carrying that hint of mischief I knew so well. "What's the trouble?" Before I could get a word in, Karen launched into her tirade like a wind-up toy set loose. She pointed at my truck, her voice hitting octaves that could spook my horses. "This junker is a public nuisance," she declared, jabbing her finger at the Ford like it had personally insulted her. "It's lowering our property values, violating HOA regulations, and frankly, it's an embarrassment to the entire community." Jake listened, his face a mask of professionalism, though I caught the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. Karen had no idea Jake grew up on this ranch, learning to drive in that very junker when he was 16, fishtailing down our back roads with a grin as wide as Texas. She didn't know about the summers we spent rebuilding its engine, laughing, over busted knuckles and warm beers, or how that truck hauled hay for our horses and carried Jake to his high school prom. To her, it was just a rusty eyesore. To us, it was family. She kept going, her voice rising as she listed grievances. My truck's unacceptable appearance, its proximity to the community, even my unkempt appearance in my work boots and flannel. "This man's practically a vagrant," she snapped, gesturing at me like I was some drifter squatting on her lawn. I raised an eyebrow, tempted to fire back, but Jake's calm nod told me to hold off. He adjusted his hat, letting her rant until she paused, for breath, her chest heaving like she'd run a marathon. "Ma'am," he said finally, his voice steady as a judge, "mind telling me exactly what law you think is being broken here?" Karen blinked, thrown off by his calm. It's against HOA rules, she stammered, clutching her clipboard tighter. Jake tilted his head, his badge glinting in the sun. HOA rules don't apply to private property outside your jurisdiction, he said, glancing at me with a look that said, "Can you believe this?" Karen's smirk faltered, but she doubled down, insisting the truck was a safety hazard, and devaluing her home. Jake's eyes flickered with amusement, but he kept his cool, stepping closer to the truck to inspect it. "Looks like it's on my dad's land," he said, running a hand along the fender. "Been here for years, hasn't it, Dad?" I nodded, grinning. "Yup, right where we parked it after you took it mudding back in '09. Karen's jaw dropped, her phone nearly slipping from her hand as the realization hit. She'd called the sheriff on me, only to find out he was my son. The air crackled with the kind of tension you'd see in a Western standoff, and I could practically hear the gears grinding in her head. Jake turned back to her, all business. "Ma'am, let's talk about this complaint," he said, his tone polite but firm, setting the stage for a takedown she'd never see coming. Jake let Karen's rant run its course, her voice climbing higher as she listed every imagined sin of my truck. Its unsightly rust, its threat to property values, its blatant disregard for community standards. She stood there, clipboard in hand, her blonde bob quivering with indignation, certain she'd summoned the full weight of the law to crush me. When she finally paused, gasping for air, Jake adjusted his hat, his badge glinting in the morning sun. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but firm, like a teacher addressing a wayward student. "Can I see those HOA bylaws you keep mentioning?" Karen blinked, caught off guard, but her confidence held. She thrust her clipboard at him, its pages dog-eared from overuse, stuffed with highlighted rules and post-it notes. Jake took it, flipping through with the practiced ease of someone who'd studied property law before pinning on his sheriff's badge. He scanned the document, his brow furrowing slightly, though I knew he was already 3 steps ahead. "Says here your HOA governs Sunny Hills lots 1 through 48, he said, tapping a page. "This ranch isn't listed. It's outside your jurisdiction." Karen's smirk faltered, her mouth opening and closing like a trout on a hook. But it's an eyesore," she sputtered, pointing at my truck like it was a toxic spill. "It's lowering our home values. It's a safety hazard." Jake didn't flinch, his gaze steady as he handed back the clipboard. "An eyesore's not a crime, ma'am," he said. "This truck's on private property, my dad's property. He's got every right to park it here." He glanced at me, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Been here for years, hasn't it, Dad?" I nodded, leaning against the fence. "Yup, since you took it mudding in '09 and nearly got it stuck in the creek." Karen's face went from red to ashen, her eyes darting between us as the penny dropped. Jake wasn't just the sheriff. He was my son. Her 911 call, her trump card, had just turned into a losing hand. But she wasn't done yet. "This is outrageous," she snapped, clutching her phone like a lifeline. "I'll escalate this to the county. I'll file a formal complaint." Jake raised an eyebrow, his patience thinning but his tone still polite. "Ma'am, you called 911 over a parked truck. That's not an emergency. False reports tie up resources and can carry fines, up to $500 in this county or worse, depending on intent." The air grew thick, Karen's bravado crumbling like dry dirt. She stammered, backpedaling fast. I didn't mean it was an emergency. It's a misunderstanding. I just want the neighborhood to look nice." Jake crossed his arms, his badge catching the light again. "If you've got concerns, talk to your neighbor first," he said, nodding at me. "Calling in a false report wastes my deputy's time and taxpayer money." He paused, letting that sink in. "Next time, maybe knock on the door. Bring coffee, work it out." I couldn't resist piling on. "Or some of that pie you're always bragging about at the community potlucks," I said, grinning. Karen's glare could have melted steel, but she was out of moves. The clipboard hung limp in her hand, her authority exposed as a paper tiger. Jake tipped his hat to her. All manners, but no mercy. "Anything else I can help you with, ma'am?" he asked. Karen muttered something incoherent, her face a mix of fury and humiliation, and turned toward her golf cart. The battle was over, and she'd lost spectacularly. Karen's golf cart sputtered off, kicking up a trail of dust as she fled the scene, her muttering fading into the morning air. Jake and I stood by the truck, watching her disappear around the bend, her defeat as clear as the Texas sky above. The tension that had hung over my ranch like a storm cloud dissipated, replaced by the familiar sounds of my horses nickering in the distance and the hum of cicadas waking up for the day. Jake shook his head, his crooked grin breaking through. "She really thought she'd roll up and have your truck towed," he said, chuckling. "Guess she didn't count on the sheriff being family." I laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Son, she didn't count on a lot of things." We wandered over to the truck, its chipped paint and weathered chrome gleaming in the sunlight like a badge of honor. "Remember when we rebuilt this thing?" Jake asked, running a hand along the fender. How could I forget? Summers spent in the barn, tools scattered across the dirt floor, teaching him how to swap out a carburetor while he peppered me with questions about life, love, and everything in between. That truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was where he learned to drive, where we hauled hay for the horses, where he snuck off to kiss his high school sweetheart under the stars. Karen saw a junker. We saw a piece of our history. By noon, the story was already spreading like wildfire through our small town. My phone buzzed with texts from Sunny Hill's neighbors, folks I'd known for years who lived under Karen's HOA reign. "Heard you put Karen in her place," read one from Mike, a retired mechanic who lived 2 streets over. "About time someone did," wrote Sarah, who'd once gotten a fine for planting unapproved roses. Apparently, Karen's crusade wasn't just against me. She'd been terrorizing the neighborhood with her rulebook, citing people for everything from improper mailbox colors to excessive Christmas lights. Her 911 call on me was the final straw for a lot of folks, and Jake's takedown was the talk of the town. That evening, a few neighbors stopped by, bringing cold beers and stories of their own Karen encounters. We sat on my porch, the old oak, tree casting long shadows across the yard, and laughed about her clipboard-waving tyranny. One guy, Dave, told us how she'd measured his lawn with a ruler to enforce a maximum grass height rule. Another, Lisa, said Karen had tried to ban her kid's lemonade stand for unpermitted commerce. It was clear Karen's power trip had worn out its welcome, and my run-in with her was the spark that lit the neighborhood's rebellion. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not another HOA complaint, but a typed apology from Karen herself. It was a half-hearted thing, claiming she'd misread the property lines and meant no offense. I showed it to Jake when he swung by for Sunday dinner, and he snorted. "Bet her lawyer made her write that," he said, cutting into his steak. I didn't bother responding. Karen's words were as empty as her threats. My truck stayed right where it was, polished to a shine, a quiet middle finger to her HOA dreams. I even added a new bumper sticker, "Keep Texas Free." The incident became local legend, retold at the diner, the feed store, and the county fair. Jake got a few calls from Sunny Hill's residents thanking him for standing up to Karen, and a few even started a petition to vote her out as HOA president. Whether it worked, I don't know. I stay out of their politics. For me, life went back to normal, tending my horses, fixing my truck, and enjoying my ranch. Karen's been quiet, since her golf cart avoiding my side of the road. She learned a hard lesson. Don't mess with a rancher's land, or his sheriff's son. If you loved this tale of small-town justice, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Have you dealt with an overzealous HOA or a nosy neighbor? Drop your stories in the comments, I'd love to hear them. Let's keep the conversation going, and maybe we'll inspire a few more folks to stand their ground.